Alrighty, it is exactly 12:30 here in DC. So we will go ahead and get started with our session. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for this virtual CHOW panel on safeguarding our ocean future in the high seas. My name is Nichola Clark, and I'm a senior officer at the Pew Charitable Trusts, where I lead our work related to the High Seas Treaty. And I'd like to start out today by thanking the fabulous team at Bloomberg Oceans for organizing the session and inviting me to moderate. This is a topic that I'm particularly passionate about, and I'm really honored to be amongst such a fabulous group of panelists. So our roadmap for the next 45 minutes will begin by introducing you to our panelists. I'll then provide a super quick introduction to the High Seas Treaty itself. And then we'll turn it over to our panelists to get a little bit more, hear from them and their perspective on the importance of high seas protections, and also hear some of their ideas on how we can work together to advance swift, fair, and effective marine protected areas in the high seas. And then we'll try our best to save the last 10 to 15 minutes to discuss any questions that you might have in the audience. So as you think of questions, I would invite you to please share those in the chat, and we'll see how many we can tackle at the very end of our session. So I will start with a quick introduction of our panelists. So starting with Solomon Kahoʻohalahala, which I apologize, I know I still didn't pronounce that correctly, but he's known to many of us as Uncle Sol. He is a 7th generation native Hawaiian descendant.
Yeah, the meeting is
and he is, well, I might ask for people to mute themselves if they are just now joining. Great, perfect. Okay, so apologies for that. So Uncle Sol has served really in leadership and advisory positions for almost too many organizations for us to list here, but maybe to name a few. He served on the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument Advisory Council, the Native Hawaiian Cultural Working Group, the Hawaiian Island Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary, Pacific Remote Island Marine National Monument, just to name a few. I've also gotten to know Uncle Sol just through his incredible ocean championship and his engagement through the High Seas Treaty negotiations, as well as some of the seabed mining work. So welcome, Uncle Sol. Our next panelist is Dr. Doug McCauley, who is a professor at University of California, Santa Barbara, and an adjunct professor at the University of California at Berkeley. At UC Berkeley, he directs the Eric and Wendy Schmidt Center for Data Science and Environment. At UC Santa Barbara, he directs the Benioff Ocean Science Lab, which is a center that combines cutting-edge ocean research with innovative tech to solve the ocean's most pressing challenges. And these solution portfolio range from shark spotting drones to whale collision avoidance systems. And our final panelist for today is Chloe Wetzler. Chloe is a rising second-year joint JD Masters of Environmental Management student at Duke's Nichola School of the Environment, where she is concentrating in environmental policy and coastal and marine systems. Chloe is part of Earth Echo International's Youth Leadership Council, and she's also the symposium coordinator for Duke's Ocean Policy Working Group, which is a graduate student researcher center for, and also is a graduate student researcher for the Nicholas Institute's Ecosystem Services team. So really welcome our fabulous group of panelists, and looking forward to hearing more from them very soon. First up, though, before I mute myself, I will start out by a quick introduction to the High Seas Treaty. So I will pull up my presentation now. We'll get that going in full presenter view. There we go. Right. So thank you again. And we just thought that it might be helpful to start out today by making sure that everyone knows what the High Seas Treaty is, which is also more technically known as the BBNJ Agreement. And so perhaps to begin, Probably best by defining what we mean by BBNJ. So this acronym of BBNJ stands for Marine Biological Diversity Beyond National Jurisdiction, which is a bit of a mouthful. So we often say BBNJ for short, or more colloquially, the High Seas Treaty.
But that isn't my first go-to. Let's put it that way.
We'll just ask people to mute if
transparent a message as I can give.
And I was going to say that with the messaging that we have gotten from Betsy and others.
Can I ask Lisa to mute?
They are told us what will happen. And so that's where we have some.
Thank you. Great. The High Seas Treaty's core, the BBNJ Agreement's core objective is the conservation and sustainable use of BBNJ. But it's also charged with considering a package of issues, namely marine genetic resources, area-based management tools, including marine protected areas, environmental impact assessments, and then capacity building and the transfer of marine technology. And so quickly, I thought it'd be helpful to just share what we actually got in the final treaty text. So not exhaustively, but just to highlight a couple of important things. So with regard to marine genetic resources, the treaty spells out requirements to share benefits, including monetary benefits from marine genetic resources that are found in the high seas. On marine protected areas, the new agreement sets out a legal framework as well as a process for establishing a network of high seas marine protected areas. And it also includes provisions that would allow the global community to respond to natural or human-caused disasters. On environmental impact assessments, the agreement sets out consistent standards as well as a process for new and unregulated high seas activities, and includes a number of really important transparency provisions and scientific review to ensure that any activities that are taking place in the high seas are done in a way that won't cause irreversible harm. And then finally, on capacity building and the transfer of marine technology, the agreement elaborates on new guidelines to ensure effective implementation, to ensure that we have capacity building and tech transfer guidance that will help support the implementation of the overall agreement. Now, why does this agreement matter? Why do we care? So to begin with, there's really few, a fragmented puzzle of organizations that manage different aspects of human activities in different areas of the high seas with varying degrees of effectiveness. And they don't do a great job of coordinating with each other. And so it's in this messy patchwork approach that high seas governance has slipped through the cracks. And in particular, there's no, until this new agreement, there's really not a comprehensive legal system to establish marine protected areas for most of the high seas. And there's also has been really weak requirements regarding the conduct of environmental impact assessments. So the second big reason why this is a big deal is actually just the scale, the vastness of the high seas. So the high seas, these are the areas of the ocean that begin 200 nautical miles from shore, where national jurisdiction ends and areas beyond national jurisdiction begin. The high seas make up 2/3 of the ocean, and they cover almost half of the surface of the planet. So in this map, all of those areas in dark blue on the right are the high seas. And then finally, I'm sure many of you are very familiar with the 30 by 30 goal, which is perhaps more formally known as the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which sets as a target, a global target of protecting 30% of marine areas by 2030. And of course, the high seas are very important for this, not only because of their size, just mathematically, but also because of their connectivity with the rest of the ocean. And at the moment, only about 1% of the high seas are protected in the high seas. And so that's, again, a huge opportunity to meet some of those 30 by 30 goals within the high seas and under the high seas agreement. And then finally, I think this high seas treaty matters quite a bit because it advances a more equitable ocean governance regime. And the agreement in a space where access to the high seas is currently limited to only a handful of generally wealthier nations. This agreement, through its benefit sharing and capacity building and tech transfer requirements, presents a pathway to create a slightly more equitable ocean governance space. And then I will finally just end with a quick note on the timeline. The The High Seas Treaty was formally adopted almost a year ago, 19th of June 2023, after nearly 2 decades of talks at the UN to try and get this over the finish line. The agreement then opened for signature and ratification on 20th of September. And once 60 countries ratify, the treaty will enter into force. So at the moment, we have 7 countries who have officially ratified, 90 countries have signed. And there is a goal. So the High Seas Alliance, as well as a couple of other countries and NGOs, have a goal of trying to reach that 60th ratification by June 2025, which is a UN Ocean Conference. And then within 1 year of the treaty's entry into force, we will have the actual first meeting of a new COP, a new conference of parties for this BB&J agreement. And in between now and that first meeting of the BB&J COP, there's a lot of guidelines that's going to have to be established by the UN before it can actually be functional. And so I will maybe stop there with that super quick tour of what we have in the BB&J agreement. And I'd love now to kick it over to our panel discussion. So Uncle Saul, I will start with you. So I was really excited to see some of the really critical components codified within the BB&J agreement, such as the requirement that Indigenous people and local communities be consulted as part of the MPA establishment process, and that traditional knowledge be considered alongside traditional Western science as part of the sort of scientific committee. So I would love to hear more from you, Uncle Saul, on your perspective on what the High Seas Treaty means to Pacific and well, maybe what the High Seas mean to Pacific Indigenous communities, what the High Seas Treaty means, and then perhaps more specifically why high seas protections are important. So over to you, Uncle Saul. Oh, and you're muted, so I'll ask you to unmute.
Okay, okay.
Perfect.
Okay, aloha kakahia. It's morning here in Hawaii, and I know it's past your midday there in the East Coast. So, thank you for the question, Nichola. I think if I can start by saying that in Hawaii, we have a genealogy and a creation chant that refers to the creation of all things. And in the very, very first few lines of this chant, which is over 2,000 lines long, it says that the matter which is at the bottom of the ocean is energized. And in that matter, the first living creature to emerge would be the coral polyp. And then from there, it says that all other creatures of the ocean are created, and the creation moves up the water column into the nearshore waters, and then creation begins on the land into the hills and the mountains, and then finally the creation also the creatures that take flight into the air. The people, we're not here and ushered into this place that we call Honua, our island Earth, until much, much, much later. But because of that, our cultural tradition says that we have a responsibility for the elders that precede us, and that takes us back all the way to the very eldest of our ancestors, which would be the coral polyp. So we have an inherent responsibility for the care of the ocean. So what this means is that in the BB&J treaty, if the idea of the treaty is to set aside areas of protection, it aligns very, very close to our responsibility as Indigenous people. And so part, I think, of the purpose of the treaty, especially in these times, are to try and address some of the issues that we are currently facing in global climate change. And so we see that caring for an area of ocean at a very large scale is going to be what we already believe is our responsibility in bringing ecosystems back into balance. So we see that we are a part of the ecosystem, and we see that by caring for large areas of ocean, we perhaps will be encouraging back that the earth come back into balance, and that oxygen producing from the smallest of our creatures into the little pua, the little tiny baby fish that are food for the larger fish, and that becomes food for us, and then all of the things that are needed to help bring a balance to the sea. So climate change perhaps might be a result if we agreed that that responsibility is tied to the ocean. And so if we can see that at a large scale like this, which takes us beyond just our own homes, that we would be contributing to this idea of finding an earth that is going to be able to heal, an earth that is going to be able to begin replenishment, and in that manner is going to be part of helping to resolve some of the challenges we are feeling right now. So as we speak, I just want to add that we have gathered here in Hawaii for the last 4 days, just ending yesterday, with members that are coming from Oceania. And these are islands that are in not just Polynesia, but in Melanesia and Micronesia. And in this gathering, we wanted to reaffirm whether or not we have a responsibility for the care of the ocean, because we are the people that live and whose country is the largest ocean on the planet. And if you look at a map and you see how much area of ocean is going to be within the area of the BBNJ, so we ask ourselves, do we have an inherent responsibility for its care? And then we ask ourselves, are we united in our voices to ensure that we want to be able to help protect our ocean? And overwhelmingly and unanimously, we have decided over the past 4 days that the answer is yes, because we are very intimate with the ocean. We have been a part of it. It is our home. We've been able to traverse it with our traditional canoes. We know the ecosystems of the sea. We know its resources, and we know that it is what gives us life. But it's not just the life of us as island people in the largest ocean. It is what gives life to our planet itself. So our view is that we are one ocean on this planet. We are one planet, and we are one people. And the BBNJ is a step in the right direction for us. And so we want to be able to be engaged in the processes of the BBNJ when it is finally ratified. And we want to offer an indigenous perspective on how we think from an indigenous view that this kind of caring and an acknowledgement and support that is unified is going to help us to find relief, regeneration, support, not just for us, but for the global earth. So this treaty is an important treaty for us. And then the inclusion of the indigenous voices in this treaty is also very important, because we have been calling for their participation. We have been acknowledging it. We know that they have a place. We're looking for integration. We're looking for equity. We're looking for justice. And the treaty, I think, allows us now to be participants, and then to elevate the indigenous voice. So we're excited about this, and I'll have you know, we are united in our voices to protect the high seas,
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Uncle Saul. It's so inspiring to hear more about the work that you're doing with Pacific Indigenous leaders, and that ethos for caring for the ocean, and that there's an opportunity, right, that this High Seas Treaty could present to operationalize that duty to care for ocean and for planet and people. So thank you very much. Doug, I might turn it now over to you. The BB&J agreement includes references to the precautionary approach, which means, among other things, that a lack of scientific information should not be used as a reason to fail to take conservation action. And in fact, that governments should be more cautious when there's scientific uncertainty. But governments will inevitably still need to build a scientific case for high seas marine protected areas to be established under the new BB&J treaty. So on the one hand, the high seas, we have heard that the high seas are a data poor space. On the other hand, we have technology and tools to overcome some of these data gaps. So as a scientist who has done a lot of thinking about this question, I'd love to hear more from you on what your advice is for the international community, how we should go about addressing high seas data gaps to the extent there are that they exist, and also how we should go about building that scientific case for future high seas MPAs. Over to you, Doug.
Thanks, Nichola. And a lot in those questions, but good questions. I'll say I always it's always difficult to follow the wisdom of you, Saul, but a privileged spot to be here. And I do want to, since your question is about data, I want to just add, you said this before, Nichola, but add again that I'm going to share a little bit about slightly different currencies of data and knowledge, say different than what Saul shared, currencies of cultural value, historical value. The data that I'm going to speak about are about data that might be collected from a satellite or the back of a research vessel or from an underwater submersible. And they're just different. They're not, in fact, in my opinion, some of the data and the sources of information and wisdom that Saul shared are arguably more important in these processes. But suffice to say, for our conversation this morning, they are another source of information to be brought into this decision making. So, Nichola, to your question, with that in front of us, to your question, what are we looking at in the high seas as we grapple with this really exciting opportunity to think about a next generation of protected areas potentially in the high seas? How much do we know? Well, I think there's the common adage, we've heard different flavors of this over and over again, that we know more about the moon than we know about the high seas, than the deep sea, than the bottom of the ocean, right? And there's truth, that is a true statement, but there's also something important that is connected to that statement, which is that we know a lot about the moon, which is to say, we also know a lot about the high seas. There are literally billions in this currency I mentioned, data collected by scientists all over the world. There are billions and billions of data points that have given us insight into what the biology is of this vast part of our ocean planet, about the oceanography, about the physical habitat, about how humans are using that space. I'm kind of a visual person, so Nichola, if it's okay, I might just quickly share an image to sort of make a point. Let me know if you can see that. Okay.
We can see it. Yep.
Okay. Excellent.
Full screen.
So to this point about having an immense amount of data in the high seas, as I said, there's a biological biodiversity dimension and a human dimension, just to illustrate the vast density of understanding that we've now collected. I'm showing you here something that looks like a map, but in fact, what this is a data plot. We're showing a human dimension of data in the high seas. This is a collection of data from vessels transiting across the global oceans, including the high seas, put together in one space for a year. So again, it looks like a map because people are using all parts of our ocean and the high seas at such density that it renders the feeling of a map. We're going everywhere on the ocean except on land. So in fact, both things are true. Both parts of your question, I guess, are true, Nichola, which is that there is not enough known about the high seas. There's a lot more for science to learn. We need to double down on our investments in ocean research and be strategic about what and where we learn. But there's also a huge amount of knowledge already in front of us. And actually, if anything, there is a cost for waiting for more information to come in. We have so much information about this space the suggestion that maybe this exercise of creating high seas MPAs is decision makers blind throwing darts at a map is not at all true because of this immense amount of knowledge in front of us. And the cost, maybe to make the point about the cost for waiting, I just want to show this illustration. We're not looking at the high seas, we're looking down on a visualization of Manhattan. We'll see Manhattan change over a visualization that is intended to show 200 years of ecological history. From our vantage point, just a tiny little slice of ecological history for this space, but you see Manhattan change from something that was forests and wetlands, wolves, and bears roaming around that island to something very different, the built environment that we know now. But if you look closely as that changes, there's this little swath of green, which we know so well, Central Park in the center. 150 years ago, very wise ancestors had the vision and the wisdom to keep at least a vestige, a chunk of that nature in place so that we can all enjoy, celebrate, and take from it today. Now, the high seas are not going to become like Manhattan in 50 years or 100 years, but they're going to be a lot busier. If you consider, again, this visual we looked at before, the oceans have already become very busy in the last half century. With new kinds of ocean activity, we're going to see more and more human activity, more busyness, and less opportunity to create these central parks of the high seas. Maybe to a point of data, as Nichola mentioned, this has been a subject of interest to myself and colleagues around the world that we've been working on this question of pulling together and synthesizing insight from data that's out there to guide actions, and specifically some of these actions considering high seas MPAs. We pulled together 22 billion data points of information, scientific information from the high seas. And the first thing we did, we use, of course, AI to guide for better, worse, often worse decision-making in all contexts. We use the decision-making algorithm, a type of AI, to help us pick out some of the hot spots of biodiverse activity and importance in the high seas. What we told it was effectively, please sift through these billions of data points, find areas that have lots of biodiversity, they're climate resilient, that have a lot of habitat diversity and a bunch of other measures, and return to us this portrait of green here on the high seas, this portrait of where some of these oases, you might say, sit in the high seas. Now, as I said, we're all, myself included, a little uncomfortable about having algorithms make these decisions for us, right? So the next thing that we did was put us back in charge, put people back in charge. So this is just a visual of a tool that allows us to exert our own priorities, whatever they are, in querying that data. If you really think biodiversity should be emphasized when choosing some of these areas in the high seas, you can upregulate the importance of biodiversity, or you can maneuver away from fishing, or if you really think that habitats like seamounts, undersea mountains, and vents are important, you can put that priority in. There's no perfect high seas MPA. There is as many perfect high seas MPAs as there are perfect people in this webinar and out there. And it allows us to actually inject our own priorities, whatever they may be, into the process, whether this then becomes a service for Minister of Environment, the community in Oceania, or even a local community that's a subset of those ocean-facing communities, to have this power of data at their disposal for decision-making. So maybe I'll just pause there. Again, I think the answer to the question, or both of your questions, one, Nichola, is that there's more to learn, absolutely, but there's a lot of information at our disposal. We should feel empowered by that science. And two, that that science and that data is there ready for us to put into service as we think about this remarkable historic opportunity for beginning to create a next generation of high seas MPAs. Pause there.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Doug, for demonstrating all that we do know and all that the tools that we have in order to make some really informed decisions on where we might want to prioritize the placement of high seas protected areas. So thank you very much for that. So Next up, I'll turn to Chloe, though I will maybe just do a quick plug for the audience. So we'll have a question for Chloe. I'll have one final question for our panelists, and then with whatever time we have left, we'll try and tackle some audience questions. So if you have any questions that are burning, please share those in the chat. So Chloe, the voice of youth was fairly absent during negotiations for the BB&J process, certainly very absent during the early stages, though there were certainly a handful of some youth delegates who were there for the very final rounds of negotiations. Could you talk a little bit more about why youth engagement matters in the high seas space and how you would want to see youth represented as we move forward towards implementation of this new BB&J treaty? Oh, and we can't hear you for some reason, Chloe. And now I think we can. Or no. Still nothing. Apologies, everyone. I will also attest that we did a test run and we could hear Chloe just fine. Maybe there we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Ooh, sorry. Don't know what that was. So youth engagement in the high seas space is incredibly important. It is our future, so we have a lot at stake here. But for young people in this space, it can often be really tough and feeling like there's a lot of doom and gloom, not a lot to do, feeling powerless, especially when thinking about processes like the UN and COP. We don't really learn about that in school. There's not a clear way for us to be involved, which is kind of frustrating given that this is our future. So I think it's really important for there to be intentional inclusivity of young people in these spaces. And I would just point out that like growing up and in school, even as someone who was really interested in the ocean and the environment, and I like sought out environmental science classes, we did not get to learn about this at all. And if it wasn't for some of the youth leadership summits and trainings I went to with Earth Echo International, I would have no idea what a COP was, BB&J, NPAs. And when I talk to my friends who are not youth ocean activists, it also confuses them, which I think is kind of a shame because it's such an important topic for everyone that we should really work on getting more people involved and interested because it's something that they would really like to be involved in. And it could help combat sort of some of that climate anxiety, having an official channel to participate in this big international cooperative effort that's focused on positive change and solutions. So that's really important. But then also for the long-term success of high seas conservation, getting young people involved now will inspire them to study these things, want to be interested long-term. And so if we can create a generation of lifelong high seas champions that are going to keep pushing for this, because as you referred to, Nichola, it has taken a very long time and it likely will still continue to take some time to get this ratified. And then once there is a BB&J COP to get those processes rolled out and with the designation of MPAs. So inspiring young people is really, really crucial at this stage. And then I would point out for like how I would like to see that happen. Earth Echo International and the High Seas Alliance just launched a High Seas Youth Ambassador program that I think is really cool for a number of reasons. I think for youth involvement, an emphasis on mentorship and training is really important because it can be really intimidating for a young person to come into these spaces where we have very distinguished people who have tons of experience and fancy degrees or who have lived in these places. So being able to take young people into those spaces and show them that even if you're new to this, just because you're passionate, like that is enough and you can be meaningful and you have fresh perspectives that are helpful. So training and on advocacy, but then also how to approach situations professionally, confidently, that's really important. And then another thing, if resources allow, if any of these sort of fellowships, internships, youth ambassador cohorts, if they can be paid, that's really great at reducing barriers to entry for who would even have the bandwidth or capacity to take on another time commitment, because as young people, we are really busy. And then one final thing too is that a cohort is really cool, because something that I really appreciated as a youth leadership council member from Earth Echo is having a cohort and a network of other young people who are involved in this, because it's great to be optimistic, but sometimes it can be tough, especially if things are taking a long time. But having a network of other young people who are concerned and passionate about the same issues you are is really helpful for supporting each other and inspiring each other to continue to fight for high seas conservation.
Thank you so much, Chloe. That's really, really helpful to hear not only the importance of youth engagement, but also to hear more about some of the challenges and barriers to that, and to get your thoughts on how we might overcome them. So thank you. And I maybe actually my sort of final question for all of the panelists, and we'll go in order, starting with Uncle Sol, is to actually dig in on this stakeholder participation process. So within the new BB&J agreement, stakeholder participation is a really important and central part of the marine protected area establishment process that's set out by the treaty. And so I would love to hear from you all respectively on how you would envisage stakeholder engagement, how you would envisage that stakeholder engagement process to look like for Uncle Sol. I'd like to know what you think about how you would want to see stakeholder engagement with Indigenous people and local communities. For Doug, I'd like to hear about how you would envisage that stakeholder engagement process for scientists, and sort of how science might input. And then for Chloe, I'll have the same question for you about youth and engaging youth as part of that MPA establishment process. So maybe Uncle Sol, I'll turn it over to you to learn more about what you would want to see in terms of engagement with Indigenous people and local communities in the process for establishing a high seas MPA.
Thank you, Nichola. I think I can reflect back on our conversations over the last 4 days within a semblance of Indigenous people from, as I said, across the Pacific. And we specifically talked about the BB&J, and we also talked about some of the current kinds of issues that are relevant to the discussion of BB&J. We have deep sea mining that is being proposed right now as we speak for the areas of the Pacific, like the Clarion Clipperton area, which is adjacent to Hawaii. We talked about the fact that some of our islands and the people that participated, like Tuvalu, their islands are being inundated with sea level rise. You know, the question is, where do we go, and what do we do? And so it all boiled down for us as Indigenous people that we are in the largest ocean on Earth, that has the largest areas that are going to be part of the areas that we refer to as the BB&J. And at the same time, we're the people of the ocean that are feeling some of the impacts that are happening as we speak. So for us, knowing that we have a cultural connection to the deep sea means that we have to impart in this process of engagement our concept of connection to the deep sea, because it is intimately and closely related to what we believe is going to be some of the kinds of solutions to help mitigate what we are currently feeling right now, you know. So we want to make sure that we're not going to be left out of a process. So we have now assembled our people from, like I said, across the entirety of the Pacific, and we want people to understand that it is the place that has been our home for generations. It is the place that has been connected by voyaging canoes that make it possible for us to inhabit this area of ocean that is incredible. And then today we are all assembled as the descendants of the great canoes. But having that knowledge means that we also know that the ecosystems of which we have been able to subsist on is something that is critical in our ability to continue to live in this large ocean. So when it comes to the BB&J, then we believe that this concept and this philosophy and this creation and this genealogy needs to be included in the discussions of the BB&J, because we are not just talking about an area of ocean that needs to be protected. We are talking about a genealogy that connects us all to this place. And that genealogy is tied to the ecosystems that provide not just for us as the ocean people, but for the people on the planet as a whole. So the phytoplankton that is part of the great ocean provides perhaps that second breath of air that we breathe. The others come from terrestrial areas. And like we said, the food web that is there that has helped for us to subsist is tied to the care of these ecosystems. And if they are disrupted, then what happens then in the food chain itself, in the food web? And so the importance of the BB&J, if we know that that is our connection to the ocean, then this perhaps allows us, as I said earlier, an opportunity for engagement. And therefore, we cannot just sit by and believe that others might be responsible for our perspective. So how do we do this? So I think this was the first step for us to come to some consensus about who we are as the people of the large ocean. This ocean is like our country. We've lived on it, and we call it the blue continent, and we know that the blue continent not only benefited us as the ocean people, but like I said, it is the largest area that produces oxygen for the global earth, and the air that we all breathe. It is the area that also provides a lot of the fish that we consume. So we want to now have a unified voice, and therefore bring this voice, and we are going to provision our canoe. We're going to put onto our canoe all of the kinds of knowledge that are indigenous knowledge, that are indigenous experiences, and we're going to take the best of our people and provision them on a canoe, and our canoe is going to set sail and a voyage into the areas like the BB&J. And by doing that, what we hope is that we're going to be bringing to the forefront in this opportunity to talk about where do we go in the BB&J. Well, from an indigenous perspective, we would like to offer some of those areas of suggestion that are tied to us as a people and a culture that sees ourselves as part of ecosystems. And therefore, our suggestions are going to be about how to bring ecosystems back into balance and how to bring it, because if we do so, it is our belief that the earth will be now a better place. It'll be able to replenish. It'll be able to sequester carbon and bring it down into the depths of the sea. And it'll be the area that can continue to provide food, for food security. And so this is going to be our initiative. But because we're such a large country and we're sprawled all over the entirety of the Pacific, it is a difficult conversation to have. So we have decided that it is time for us to precede these potential opportunities that are coming about with the passage or the ratification of the treaty itself. and then have conversations that prepare us so that when the opportunity arises for engagement, then we are already provisioned our canoes and we are already provisioned a sail plan, and we want to make a contribution there. So we are preparing our canoes to set sail into the areas of BB&J because it is our country, it is our home, it is what we've been able to understand as ecosystems that need to be placed back in balance. And by doing so, we can continue to be able to live in this ocean that is our country. So we're getting prepared to set sail.
That's excellent, Uncle Saul. I can't wait to see that journey and support you on that journey. And thank you for bringing this important concept of connection, and not just sort of ecological connection, but connection of ocean space, connection with culture, connection with each other. I note that we are, I think, at time, but I do want to give Doug and Chloe just a super quick, maybe 30 seconds each, 30 to 45 seconds each of what you would want to see in terms of engagement with scientists. We'll start with you, Doug.
Sure. Well, thank you, Saul, for that beautiful and important message. I'd say just briefly that scientists, or many of the scientists that I work with, our goal with stakeholder engagement is to be a service to stakeholders. These other currencies of data that I spoke about that others have collected, we want it to be an empowering agent so that as we all come together as a global community, we get one shot to set up this next generation of Papahanaumokuakeas, of Serengetis for the high seas, right? And so that opportunity to get this right forever will matter for people, will matter for climate, will matter for biodiversity, will matter for planet. So we want to help with what we do well, which is this currency of science and data, to see that come out right.
Thanks, Doug. Chloe. Oh, we can't hear you again, Chloe. Still nothing. There we go.
Oh, you can. Okay. Well, I guess really briefly, I would love to see more transparency during negotiations and like high seas governance topics for younger children, just because I had no idea that the high seas and international governance, like they were so related and interconnected, and teaching young kids about that from a very early age, I think will make them want to or feel more tied to this issue, and then want to seek out opportunities later, like internships, fellowships, ambassador programs, to get engaged. So I would just say focusing really young to show kids and inspire them that this is a space that even exists, because it's both grueling but really exciting at the same time for progress.
Thank you so much, Chloe. And thank you to all of our panelists, Chloe, Doug, Uncle Saul. It's been really such a pleasure and such a treat to get to learn from all of you. And I'll also thank again Bloomberg for being the inspiration and helping to organize us all for this session. And thank you to all of you in the audience. I'm sorry that we didn't have a chance to go to audience Q&A, but I'm sure any of our panelists here would be really delighted to chat more with you about the high seas. So if you do have questions, would encourage you to follow up directly. Always happy to chat. With that, I will thank you again for coming and wish you all a happy rest of your Capitol Hill Oceans Week. Thanks, everyone.
Aloha.